how much evil is too much evil in a D&D game? That might seem like a really weird question to ask, but think about it for a second. We mainly play D&D because, as I think Matt Colville puts perfectly, it's about the most fun you can have with your brain. I think it's even more than that. I think D&D offers many of us, certainly did me as a kid, a way to touch what you might call your soul. Right now, if that sounds a little bit heavy, so be it. I think D&D can be a way to explore yourself through somebody else, and to be able to examine parts of yourself and others and the world in a way that is truly magical and safe. Because once that final dice is rolled for that session, you can walk away and go back to your relative mundanity of your day-to-day existence. D&D gives us an opportunity to come face to face with who we are, with aspects of humanity. That includes evil. And in this Talks Tenday, I want to talk about evil in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, interestingly enough, when you go back, bear with me a second, when you go back to the original game, which I have here in a little box set here. So when you go back to the original game, these little white pamphlets, evil wasn't really talked about very much. Not very much at all. Chaos was talked about. Law was talked about. And, I've heard lots of commentators talk about why that was. Why wasn't evil and good talked about too terribly much? I think it was in some part because, to a certain extent, the idea of law and chaos was kind of enough. It was sort of like, it was generally, I think, assumed that if you were somebody on the side of law, you were more likely to be a good person, or what we might traditionally call good. And if you were on the side of chaos, you might be more inclined towards behaviors that some people might call evil. But I think therein, my guess is that, I don't know this for sure, but my guess is that Gary Gygax kind of went, man, evil and good, I don't want to touch that. Like most of the concepts of evil and good that we humans can consider, we can only consider within the limited frame of humanity. In our history, we have seen what we might call acts of complete evil, especially during war times, right? We have seen so much in the history of humanity, terrible things done. Yet, you can also see many, not all, but some of those things reflected in nature. A grown-up lion, without any thought to the morality of it, haplessly murdering an infant and eating it in front of its parents. Yeah, if you watch wildlife programs, you'll see that happening all the time. And we humans have trouble with that. That's probably why we're captivated by it, right? We have some trouble with that because we're like, is that evil? Does the lion know that it's doing something terrible and wrong and evil? We have a very complex relationships with good and evil, and how we understand it. And I think this is why it's really important when you are starting to play D&D, especially if you're playing with your kids, to agree on what the certificate of your game, of your campaign, is going to be. It's something that I do. I did with our first campaign that you can watch here on our YouTube channel. If you watch the session 0 that lots of people have been enjoying, that we have, it's one of our more recent uploads. The session 0 that we did, one of the first things I asked them was like, what certificate do you want this to be? And I really think of it in terms of movie certification, right? So you've got U, PG-13. Here in the UK, we have a one called 12. So it goes U, PG, 12, 15, 18. I know in other parts of the world, you have things like U, PG-13. What do you have after that? NC-17, no, R-rated, and then NC-17, right? So you got different ratings. It's a really easy way with your players, I find, to sort of establish the depth to which you investigate certain themes in the game. Now, my players, my kids, chose 12 certificate, which kind of lands right in the middle. You got U and PG on one side, and then you've got 15 and 18 on the other side. And so 12 lands them right in the middle. And to give you an idea, here in the UK, a film with a 12 certificate, you're unlikely to hear many of the F word being said too terribly much. Certainly, themes of a sexual nature will not be explored or discussed. Violence will start to encroach, and certainly slightly more adult themes around that. But it gives you lots as a dungeon master to start to play with. And one of the things that I've been investigating as we lead up to the start of campaign 2 is, how much do I delve into evil in this campaign? Because it's something I want to delve into a little more than we did in campaign 1. In campaign 1, which was a PG, evil had an understandable motive. And that's part of what made it PG. So there's this terrible mind flayer lich that wants to corrupt everything, just wants to find what's wrong with things and bring that into the light. And they want to do that because they want to challenge the current god of corruption and ascend to godhood. Therein at least is motive. Then, as the players, spoilers for campaign 1, investigated more into this heinous villain's background, they found that it was somebody who was once betrayed. And so lost all civility for so-called laws. Started to see the injustice in things, the unfairness, and also the egregious nature of those people who have power, those people who betrayed him, killed his wife, all these kind of things. And so more and more, you started to have a villain who you could at least, if not align with, understand their motive for becoming the monster that they became. Excuse me. And so what I wanted to do when you're running a game that's sort of PG, the depth to which we explore themes like evil is, how palatable do we make evil? How much do we try and make it something that can be at least understood by, in the case of my players, my young children? But I also wanted them, when you're a dad DM or a parent DM, D&D gives you an amazing way to help your kids come to terms with and start to face some very uncomfortable things that they may face in life. So corruption and people not being who they present themselves to be was something that I did want to show my children, and I wanted to do that through the game, and could do that through the game. And as we've come into, and as we get closer to campaign 2, I've started to consider, what if I were to show my children malevolence that is less easy to understand? And as I've been considering this, I've been seeing a lot of the way Dungeons and Dragons as a game, as a company, relates to good and evil. And it seems, in the most part, in my clumsy way, that I understand this, and an even clumsier way that I'll try to articulate it, that D&D is moving away from the more binary approach that this monster is evil and this beast or monster is good. Demons are evil and, celestials and angels are good. Dungeons and Dragons seems to be moving away from that as a way that they want us to, or that they invite us at the very least, to consider how we categorize these things. And as I look at how I want to bring evil, how I want to present evil to my players in the next game, again, I was super PG in the last game. I made evil almost understandable. You might not be able to empathize with it or align with it, but I showed that there was a motive behind these dark machinations at the very least. In this next campaign, I'm wondering where I can push the boundaries of evil within the game and the relationship that my players will have and the encounters that they will have with evil. And it's led me to think a lot about good and evil and how Dungeons and Dragons has worked with that and used that over the years. And like I said, in more recent times, it seems, again, I'm not saying that this is what Wizards of the Coast or Dungeons and Dragons are trying to do, but it's certainly my interpretation at a very clumsy level, is that they're trying to alleviate or lift the kind of the labels we might put on things as bad and evil and, you know, good and righteous and justified, you know. It seems that they're kind of being a little fluid, right? They're being a little loosey-goosey with like, hey, yeah, demons aren't, maybe that not all demons are evil, right? I'm not yet sure what I feel about that, but I've noticed it. Let's put it that way. I've definitely noticed it. I come from a time and an era in my life and in my experience with Dungeons and Dragons where I think that for the most part, a lot of the way that people interact with other races and alignments in D&D is almost like aspects of humanity. And so this is where the stereotypes often have poorly arisen from, right? It's like dwarves are these surly, you know, gruff, you know, the older stereotypes, excuse me, of dwarves as these surly, gruff, kind of heart of gold, but a tough exterior, you know, kind of thing. And it's like, well, that's an aspect of humanity, isn't it? There, you know, and elves as these more aloof and distant, you know, androgynous characters, you know, that are a bit more sort of dreamlike and otherworldly. And aloof and perhaps even arrogant, you know. And again, those are elements I find of humanity expressed through a fantasy race, right? A make-believe race. And what I have been challenging myself to do is to explore the other species in this fantasy make-believe world as completely separate from humanity because they're not human, for starters. And I've also started to think of good and evil in the same way. Do you know, most of the evil that I see in a lot of the D&D out there, my own included, are kind of aspects of human good and evil, you know, which is not to lessen that to any extent. It can still be heinous beyond imagination. But I've started to wonder about how you can describe and express good and evil in a way that is beyond the boundaries of just humanity. I gave an example of this earlier with the lion on the prairie capturing an impala, a baby impala, and tearing it apart in front of its viewing parents, not far away, several hundred yards away, right? And like, we humans find that very difficult to understand, right? We would find that very difficult to understand. We don't know how to label that. Is that evil? Well, if a human were to do it, we most certainly would call that evil, wouldn't we? If a lion does it, we don't really know what to call that. That's part of what captivates us to that. And I want to explore the same thing in my game. How can I have other races, other monsters, other beings of the make-believe Dungeons and Dragons world express things that humans might go, that's terrible, but are simply normal. And what does good look like outside of a human's capacity to experience good? What does evil look like outside of a human's capacity to express or to experience evil and good? And I'll end this stream by sharing something with you. Is I've started to think about how I can push the boundaries, and I've thought of a way of trying to express how a demon, for example, the evil that a demon would exhibit, that they wouldn't think of as evil. There's simply a demon being a demon, right? I've started to think, how could you express that in a way that would push our concept of evil as far as it could possibly go, and maybe a bit further? And I'll share a little scenario. This isn't easy listening, but it will hopefully uh, give you an idea of where you can start to have these mental thought experiments to be able to bring more depth and richness and color and exploration to your games. This is actually inspired by R.A. Salvatore, the author of the Drizzt books. And there's a point in one of the books. Now, I'm going to elaborate. These are not Mr. Salvatore, the author's words at all. These are mine. But I remember reading about a scenario that one of his main characters goes through, Wulfgar the barbarian. And he is taken to the abyss and he is tortured for many, many years. And it got me, this little scenario got me thinking about what could represent a kind of evil that is beyond the limits of a human's capacity for it. And therefore, it could become something that would broaden your world and deepen the experiences that you can offer to your players and to their characters. Here's the scenario. A warrior who fights for justice and goodness for many, many years, battles beasts and monsters, and finally comes face to face with demons and justly fights to expel these demons from their world, but fails, and is captured and is taken to the darkest, rankest abyss, where they are tortured over and over and over. Pain, anguish, horror is a second to second reality for this mighty warrior, this once mighty warrior. And they are crushed and quashed. They are killed slowly, quickly, with agony over and over. And each time they are ended, they are raised once again and then killed again. Then raised once again, then killed again. And this existence continues for many, many years. During the fleeting moments of sanity that remain for this once mighty warrior, they dream of returning to their partner and their children and escaping from the horrors of the abyss. Weeks become months, become years, become a timeless amalgam of pain, suffering, agony, and torture. Broken and mended, only to be broken again. And at this point, we reach really the extent of the evil that is familiar for humanity. The demons threaten and tell of the terrible things that they will do to the warrior's family. And this leaves him anguished beyond imaginings. One day, a scenario arises after so long that allows the mighty warrior the faintest chance of escape. And after much striving and much suffering, they managed to get away. They managed to escape from the torture. It's not easy. It almost ends him, but they get away. And after a long journey of further pain and longing and suffering, they get back home. They get back home. They get back home to a family that had given them up for dead. A family that wept endless tears on his arrival back home. A family that are full of joy to be reunited once again. And so the great warrior very slowly starts the long, long process of processing the trauma, the pain, the suffering, and the torture that they underwent. It's not easy. It takes ages. It takes months. It takes years. But slowly, ever so slowly, the warrior starts to get back a tiny bit of himself, thanks to the love of his partner, his children, his community, and the wider community around him. This once mighty warrior, completely broken, but escaped from hell. After 5 years, 10 years pass, finally begins to see a spark of who he once was. Finally, just a glimpse, almost so fleeting he daren't look at it long. The traumas, the scars never able to heal, but at least able to move slowly past, begins to dare to hope once again. His family stays strong with him. His kids grow up into adults themselves. And on the day that he hopes and dreams that it is finally over, at a mealtime with his wife, with his children, he finds that they explode in front of him, hideously, terribly. He is covered in their remains, and the walls and the reality around him begin to melt away after over a decade of slow healing. It all starts to melt away to reveal just the laughter of the demon who had created this entire illusion of escape and some form of return to normality. And the demon leans in and says to the warrior, "That's just a warm-up. We're only just getting started." And as the broken scream of perfect anguish erupts from the warrior, we zoom out as the torture continues. A soul rendered into insanity. Now, when I think of that situation, when I think of that to even believe that another creature might take some delightful fun, just for starters, in inflicting such pain and suffering upon another mortal being. Yet that, to me, represents a type of evil that is very hard to say, it's very hard to deny. And I think in creating the lower planes, we have to also be given the creativity to imagine what terrible things happen there. that the lower planes aren't just terrible because they're a bit bleak, and the wind's a bit loud, and it's a bit hot, but that there might be things down there of malevolence beyond anything you can possibly imagine. And it's that for those planes, for the positive planes and the negative planes to exist, as the dungeon master, have to be willing to explore the depths and the heights that are possible. At the end of campaign 1, I did this from the opposite perspective. I had to consider that a goodly deity, a goodly god, might be willing to face oblivion for the redemption, for the absolution of some mortals. I like that idea. And spoiler alert, that's how we finished the entire campaign, was looking at what could be good beyond any possible idea of good. And I thought of sacrifice. And in particular, I thought of the idea of sacrifice as, you know, we might sacrifice a night out, or we make little sacrifices, we humans. But what if a sacrifice was sacrificing godly powers, godly existence, and facing and becoming nothing, oblivion? For what? Well, for something beyond mortal comprehension. If the upper planes and the lower planes exist, then I have to believe, as Dungeon Master, I have to conceive that they represent something beyond mortal comprehension. And as Dungeon Master, I have to do my best to stretch my experience, to stretch my brain, to consider what that might be. And in so doing, I think you can design a richer, deeper universe for your players. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think. I look forward to seeing you on the next Talks Tenday very, very soon. Big love. Bye for now.